Okay, we're going to talk about creativity. We're going to talk about the banana, the tape banana, Mauricio Catalan's piece that was sold. I got a couple people sending me stuff, and I'm like, man, I just want to record this because this is very interesting. So we're going to talk about, basically we're going to talk about three things, but one we're not going to touch on too much because it's too deep. So the first one literally is, and it has to be, what is art? And that's a very complicated thing, obviously. We're gonna just barely touch on it. But then the other two, I think we can discuss in a little more detail, which is what is the role of art in, I guess, the collective, in society, but we could say something like the individual and collective human psyche. What is the role of art in those? And then the third thing we're gonna talk about, again, briefly, I don't wanna make it too long, is the creative process, and what the creative process is like, and what is it, how does it work, and why is it the way it is, okay? And something that I would really love to teach on, maybe a course on principles of creativity. That's something I've thought about for many years. Some of you know that I'm a trained classical composer, so I worked in the very creative process itself, creation itself, and I've thought about it a lot. Also, another thing that's kind of not necessarily puzzling, because it makes sense actually, that a lot of people who are creative, they don't understand themselves the creative process, and that's kind of by default, because most people who are creative kind of intuitively, which, you know, we might call that intuition, but it's not really intuition. It's more like embodied knowledge, which is different, right? It's kind of like, and we're going to talk about that, it's kind of like the things that you know, but you don't know that you know them, right? And so anyways, but I would love to teach that, because that's something I've thought about and I've manipulated and I've really kind of laid out, and so I'm laying out kind of a structure here that I want to explain, but it all came about because of the banana taped to a wall with duct tape, right? Mauricio Catalan's piece reportedly got sold for about $120,000, and then another artist went and ate the banana and filmed himself in Instagram in a very creative fashion. Let's start there. So the question is this a work of art, or is it a con? And there will always be the tendency of thinking that, yeah, this is a con. Like I had somebody that I know. They said, well, you know, next time I'm going to put an apple, and I'm going to tape an apple, and then there's going to be my work of art, which actually I thought was very interesting. So let's start there. So I said, actually, that is a creative step that you took. It's a short step, but it's a creative step. How did she take this step? This is what she did. She said, okay, so here's a work of art. It's a banana taped to a wall, right? And now she thinks, well, this is ridiculous. This is not really art. So, but what is a banana taped to a wall? Well, what is one level of abstraction out from a banana taped to a wall? It's a fruit taped to a wall. Then she asked herself, what is another fruit that I know? An apple. So an apple taped to a wall should also be a work of art, like a banana taped to a wall is a work of art, right? So that's a little bit of an extrapolation, and that she created something, right? I think we all understand she was kind of ridiculing the piece of art rather than actually trying to come up with something. But it's actually very similar to the creation process. What a short step creation would be, right? Because there's obviously a spectrum of creative activity, right? And I kind of split it into two branches. One might be what we might call recombinatorial creative process, so like taking all the stuff that's already there and kind of like rearranging it in a different way, combining it in a different way. And then another type of creative process might be more revolutionary, right? Might be in one, you play the game slightly different than most people play. In the other, you invent a new game, right? So let's talk about the banana before I explain this. So it is tempting to ridicule something like that and say that's not art, okay? Now I'm going to caution against that. I'm going to say, don't say that. I'm going to say, try not to think it. Now you're going to think whatever you're going to think. And here's why. Because if we say that's not art, then we are adjudicating ourselves the power to decide what is art and what is not. And that's why that was the first thing that we talked about. We said what we're going to talk about, which is what is art. And since that is very hard to be able to answer specifically, because that's what we want, then I would say something like this. Instead of saying that's not art, say this. I don't like that type of art, or that doesn't inspire me. It doesn't do anything for me. And that's better, because then you are appealing to your own subjective experience of said art. Okay? Why does a lot of art do that? There's a lot of art. There's a kind of a funny movie called Untitled. I watched back in college, and there's an element of the emperor without clothes kind of thing in art, and this is by design, because art also delves into the philosophical. If you know anything, and this is why art is also related to humor. Okay, so I'm gonna get into that. Okay, all right. So try not to decide for yourself what art is or isn't, because art, by definition, basically transcends experience. It has to. That is its function. Okay? So let me go into that. This is what you see here. What you see here is this square here is a simplification of a human. Okay? So a human has emotions, has motivation, has, I said, thought. I might have time to explain what that is. Then we have words, and then we have action. Okay? And then surrounding the human, we might call something like experience, I said experience and stimuli, and they're the same thing, right? So the senses live at the border, and the border is the border of the inside of the human with reality, right? And then the very next level out of reality is the known, right? Things that that person knows, has explored before. And then outside the known, and the known is relatively small, is the unknown. And the unknown spreads theoretically infinitely, okay? And then this box moves through time, okay? That's not important right now. This is just to concentrate on the box, okay? So like I said, the senses live in the border, right? And the senses receive stimuli from the outside, okay? Obviously, when we're born, everything is unknown. But as we get some experience and some stimuli, we start to explore certain territory. But no matter how much we explore, no matter how much we know, there will always be more stuff that we don't know than we do know. That's just the nature of it. But whatever is it that we know, usually, unless you are psychotic, and I mean this technically, I don't mean this, I'm not trying to offend anybody. Knowing a little bit is enough to function. This is why action and motor, all this stuff should be really at the border. But let's just conceptualize it that way. Okay? So this is a human. Okay? So what is the role of art? What is the role? And I also tie this to humor too. As a matter of fact, it's something I've been thinking about lately. I'm thinking that we probably have to reconfigure the word art, or rather the word humor, and include it as a subset of art, because I think it fits. Because I think that I think that humor is a kind of art, in other words, right? And so what is the role of art? Here's the role of art. I'm trying to, hopefully this doesn't look too ugly when I do it. But basically, the role of art is to mediate, is the mediator between the implicit, the things that are inside, the emotions, right? The thoughts, the words, and the action of a human, and the known and unknown. So art does this kind of thing, right? No, I guess it goes all the way. Okay? So this would be, so a work of art necessarily does this kind of thing. So what does that mean? It means that this is why art can make us feel things that we've never felt before. or things that we felt before, right? Or a combination of things, or in a way that we didn't know we could feel, right? It has power, right? And so art can do that through metaphor, right? Through words and metaphor. It could do that through parody, like humor can, right? Music is a special kind of expression because it is art. So it does influence the senses, the line in the senses, the auditory system, let's say. But it is kind of an abstraction of an abstraction. It uses patterns as metaphors. So it's not words, but it's not thoughts. It's like writing between emotions and motivations. Okay. I don't know if I should explain this, but let me take the time to explain this concept real quick. So we have emotions and motivations as these are devices of thought before thought. Okay, so you get an emotional reaction. So when you see the banana stuck to the wall, right, you might have an emotion before you have a thought. The emotion is that that's stupid, or like, really, right? And then you have a thought, right? The reason that I have two thoughts here, I'll explain it, is because there's two kinds of different thoughts, at least in my head. I think this is the way it works. Before you have an idea, before you have a thought, where is that thought, right? Like you're sitting there and then you remember something, or you're sitting there and you see something and it reminds you of something, or you have an idea. But it's kind of like you have like this deep recesses of your subconscious. It's like a deep sea, right? And then out of nowhere, seemingly, there's like this thing that pops up, and it's a thought. And so I think this is a type of thought. But then a thought about a thought is a different kind of thought, because once then you have this idea, this thing that comes from the depths, then you can think about that willingly. Right? You can start to analyze it, you can start to move it, you can start to bring another idea, and then you can compare them, right? And so I think those are two different kinds of things. But it's still in your head. And then if you want to tell someone that, then you go one level of abstraction out and use words to describe, this is how I feel, this is why we communicate, this is why we talk, and then somebody says, you start to use this, you start to travel back and forth here, right? And then somebody says, "Oh, I know what you mean. I felt like that before," right? And then if you can even do one step after that, which is action. So it's kind of like what I'm doing right now. What I'm doing, I obviously have emotions and motivations in here. Now I'm not gonna go into why it's two of them like that right now. And then I have thoughts because I've thought about these ideas, and then I have thoughts about those thoughts, and then I'm putting this into words, but I'm also using my body to communicate, right? Like to use my hands when I speak, right? And so this is me as a human, right? Now, the experience of art, what it does, it mediates between the implicit and the explicit. So explicit would be something like over here. Something like here, right? And art, again, art goes through all of that, okay? So, and so, for example, a very simple pop song, for example, may be creative. And so, like, this might be more recombinatorial. So the other type of creativity that I talked about, which might be more like, let me do, what color? Let me do red here. Might be more like this, right? That it doesn't venture into the unknown. It just kind of it's predictable. You kind of know what it is, right? Most pop songs, most like a poster or like if you go to, I was just at the store, if somebody arranges the setup of the products in kind of a unique way. But it's basic. It's recombinatorial. Like literally, they're taking something that's already there, and it's not. You can't really. I don't call that really creating something, even though it's got an element of creation in it. But for me, creation requires going to the unknown. Okay, and I did a video a while back about this because creativity is such a powerful thing that creativity destroys as well as it creates. As a matter of fact, most of the time, things that are creative are destructive or they're failures, okay? And this is a feature of creativity, right? Because even though we need to create things that are new, because usually things that are old get outdated or don't work anymore, like a business idea or a way of organizing things, right? The source of true creativity is like in the video I talked about a volcano. Volcanic rock, volcanic lava is some of the most fertile land on earth, because from such a destructive power you can also have a beginning, right? And this is a feature of creativity, right? Most sperm don't make it to the egg. This is a feature of, in this case, biological creativity, right? And you need to have all of that sperm trying to make it to the egg, because if you just had one, right, that would never happen. So if you have just one new idea every billion years, that's not going to work, right? Everything is going to wither away and die, right? And so you need this process. This is the reason why, even though as ridiculous as a banana taped to a wall might seem, it has a moral and a philosophical and a psychological statement nested inside, okay? And also like a comical, right? This is why I think art and humor are related, right? Because people said, well, this couldn't possibly be a work of art. It can't. How could it? If it's, I could do that. Anybody could do that. I can call it art, right? Now, I'm not going to go into why it might have been sold or something. That's actually a principle of positioning more than anything. But most art and most pieces of new music, most pieces of new art are bad art. And this is by definition, by intention, by purpose of art itself. It has to be this way. Why? Because the reason that we have the music that we have from the past is not that there wasn't bad music in Beethoven's or Bach's time or Mendelssohn or Stravinsky. It's because what we listen to now is the filtration of the filtration of the filtration of the filtration. I'm not saying that everything we listen to now is great, but it's a lot of the stuff that we have still, that we keep, that we decide to hold on to, is things that people have loved for whatever reason. And then that gets passed down, but there was a lot more stuff that was written and done that didn't make the cut, okay? And that's fine. So that's why in point number one, I don't know how long I'm going, but I think I'm going pretty long, but there's just no way to make this short. There's just no way. In point number one, try not to judge what art is or isn't, because in a way you can't. In a way, art and creativity live outside of even morality. This is the reason why you can use art to say very dark things, to say very malicious, very malevolent things, right? Same thing as humor, right? This is also the reason why humor can be used to mask also dark feelings, right? You might use humor to really, kind of take out your anger or resentment or jealousy or envy towards somebody, and you just use humor, right? And so this is why you have this is why I like that it mediates that art and humor and the creative process is the process going from all the way from the implicit inside of yourself to all the way out, but even crossing the implicit, which is interesting, right? And is the only device that I know of that does this, and this is why art is so special, so different, right? So on point number one, I would say do not, or at least avoid. Again, this is an advice so that the creative part of it, the good part, will help you, right? If you start to close down yourself to what creativity is or isn't, or if you become a judge of what creativity is and isn't, you're gonna miss out on the upside. You're only gonna, because you cannot grade creativity. Because to grade something, you need a rubric. And you cannot have a rubric for creativity, because creativity is the process of creating a rubric, of creating the standard, of creating, of inventing. That's what, so if you might say that creativity, it is the quintessential human characteristic, right? What really sets everything apart, right? To be able to, I think there's a quote, it's been attributed to a couple of people, but it's basically something, and one of them is Einstein. I like to say it's Einstein because then people say, oh wow, Einstein said that, that's smart. Which is, discovery is seeing what, or creativity, I think he says discovery, is seeing what everybody else is seeing, but thinking what nobody else thinks. And it's kind of like that. So if you decide, if you for example, I resolve that kind of cognitive dissonance by saying, I don't like that work of art, right? But you gotta admit that even a banana taped to a wall is a philosophical, humoristic stance. Because see, what a lot of artists do is they need to go out, right? They need to go outside. And they need to see how far they can push it, right? Now let's not talk about, that guy made, money or whatever. That's different, because again, art and creativity, are obviously outside. If they're outside of morality and philosophy and psychology, they're also outside of socioeconomic concerns, right? Obviously, artists need to live too, so some artists manage to do that. But that actually has more to do with positioning, which is what the modern book on positioning is, the one that I co-wrote with my business partner, John Paul. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. Shameless plug. It will be coming out in January. But so that's a little different. It's related. It's related because in creativity is the device that allows us to, for example, establish a new business and position it correctly. So on point number 1, do not decide what art is and isn't. Don't do that. Just leave it open and say, hey, I don't like that art. That's okay. You can say that. You can totally say that, right? But then don't make a judgment. Don't say, well, I could just tape up an apple to a wall, because that's a cynical view of creativity. Rather, ask yourself, what is it that this piece of art is telling me right now? And maybe the piece of art is just bad. And like I said, that wouldn't be surprising, because most new art has to be bad. Okay? That's point number 1. Point number 2, on the nature of the role of art and creativity in society. Art is made, and creativity and the creative process and art is there to mediate, to be able to communicate with the implicit side of us, right? These are the part of us that we can't directly talk to, but this is why art is very powerful, because with words, for example, you can touch a fiber, you can touch something in there, right? A right word can change everything, really. That's something else that I'm working on, the change stability paradigm. I'll probably do another video about that, but for right now, this is why art is very important. This is the role, and this is why it breaks down and it goes into places that you never expect. It goes to places that are ridiculous. It goes into places that are wrong, right? Why? Because it has to, most of the time. But every once in a while, the artistic part, the creative part, will go to the unknown and grab something that's vital, grab something that's key, and then can bring it back. And now the known gets expanded a little bit more. Okay? So that's the other thing. And then on the third point, which is what is the the role of art in our psyche, right? This process is what rejuvenates really our existence. Really, the only way that we can discover more things that we don't know is to go through this process. Because after let's say this line is a single work of art, it's a single thing, and so now this territory here becomes explored territory, right? So now the known is a little bit bigger. And now we're a little bit wiser for it, right? Most, if you Opus 131 from Beethoven, the string quartets, I think he wrote a string quartet that has like 7 movements, which, at the time, you couldn't have, you had 4, right? And so he wrote all this stuff, and people said, wow, he's really deaf now because, wow, these pieces are like, they're like bad, right? You could still read the critics of this music. Now you could read what they wrote when they listened to that music, and it's some of the most beautiful music that Beethoven ever wrote. And this thing happens again and again and again and again. So before you judge, right? Before you judge, and again, a judge we're all judging, but as regards to creativity and art, try to be as open as you can, because there's a big upside. There's a big upside on recognizing something, on seeing what everybody else is seeing, but actually seeing something different.